As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Josh Hawley. I work for the Podesta Group. We're a bipartisan government relations and public relations firm in D.C. We're one of the top 10 on the government relations side, but then on the top 10 on the public relations side as well. I've had the pleasure of working with SPIE for more than 4 years now as part of through the National Photonics Initiative. SPIE is one of the founding members of that, has really been kind of one of the driving influences behind that. And what I've been able to do is kind of work with the community, the optics and photonics community, on defense applications. That's kind of my background from the House Armed Services Committee, but then also kind of my day-to-day work on the government relations side. I work with a lot of defense companies, but then I also work with a lot of governments as well. So what I'm going to do today is kind of walk you through, how many of you were at Photonics West? How many of you heard my presentation at Photonics West? So several, all right. So this is going to be, I'm going to use a similar format to what I did at Photonics West, but I'm going to update it on some of the key things that we've seen. How many people have seen the news today? How many people, let's see, I'm trying to make sure everybody's awake and ready to go this morning. The big news out of Washington is that everything is normal right now. That over the last few days, and we'll get into a little more of the presentation, but over the last few days, President Trump the administration has been normal. They had a successful meeting with the President of China. That's come across as now Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, finally was kind of in the forefront on foreign policy issues. And everything's just so we've had a few days of normality. So I'm going to touch wood before I move further on that one. And I like normality. So the big thing for those at Photonics West and for everybody who follows politics, there's a new political dynamic that has emerged. And President Trump tapped into something, we'll go through some slides earlier, he tapped into the community like no other presidential candidate has had. He had historically high negative ratings, but also Hillary Clinton had historically high negative ratings. And one of the things that he rode was a lot of this, he parlayed a lot of different interest into a winning coalition to be elected president. These are the Trump influencers that we've had on our radar screen and we've kind of tracked throughout the process of the transition into the new administration. Of this grouping, the family is still there. And the key thing I want to use this for is to provide you that update. Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. have taken over the family business, but they're still influential when it comes to President Trump. As most of you know, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump have actually moved into the White House, have actually moved into working at the White House as senior advisors to the president. Jared Kushner, we'll see this a little while longer, he's taken on more responsibilities within the White House. However, on the other side, if you look at the loyalists, some of this is a moving process right now, and it's very fluid at the moment. Jeff Sessions still influential, but he is now at the Department of Justice. The big one that's on the list right now is Steve Bannon. If you follow the news closely, Steve Bannon, there's kind of a House of Cards or even a Game of Thrones kind of maneuver going on in the White House right now. And Steve Bannon appears to be the Jared Kushner side with Gary Cohn of the National Economic Council, appear to have more influence than Steve Bannon does in kind of that wing of the party at this moment. Reince Priebus has, according to the reporting, has aligned himself with Steve Bannon. So it's interesting to see how all of this plays out. I think what we're seeing and what the new dynamic that's different than previous administrations is Donald Trump is leading, and his core team is very similar to how he's operated his business. He builds a group of people around him, and then he takes their opinions constantly and then determines which policy he's going to go with against his own gut as well. So continue to watch this and see how that develops. And that's something that we follow very closely. As you've known, President Trump's Twitter feed moves markets. These are some that I like I've been pointing this out for a while. Lockheed Martin is a great example of a company that was, these are kind of the General Motors and a few others. But when you get into Lockheed Martin and kind of the experience that they've had as with the largest defense program, Marilyn Houston, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, had never tweeted before. She was on the receiving end of a Donald Trump tweet. Lockheed Martin has learned how to effectively utilize Donald Trump's Twitter to their advantage because you had your initial tweet. Marilyn Houston then kind of engaged. Stock price has actually gone up some throughout this engagement. And the reason that is because for those who follow the Joint Strike Fighter, Lot 9 of the Joint Strike Fighter, it took them roughly 11 months to negotiate. When Donald Trump got involved as the then president-elect, he was able to negotiate Lot 10 within about 2 months. So one of the things that we're seeing, one of the things we've seen in some of these examples with President Trump is that the government is negotiating quicker, which ends up saving companies more money. Even though they ended up taking a rate lower than they would have expected in Lot 10, they got it done much quicker, and they've got that volume kind of in the pipeline to move forward. And that pushes into kind of the dynamics on Capitol Hill and his relationship. As we walk through the presentation, one of the things I'm going to do is kind of give you four things to think about as you do an engagement strategy. And then I'm going to give you kind of a 100-day update on kind of key initiatives, but then also some budget numbers for the Department of Defense. One of the things, the dynamic that's really interesting we're seeing right now in Washington, and I think the healthcare debate is the most clear example. This is the Congressional Partisan Voter Index. All of the bright red districts are Republican districts where the registration is higher than 10 points. All the bright blue or the dark blue are where the Democratic registration is higher than 10 points. So these are highly partisan districts. If you're in a bright red district, the biggest worry you have about your electoral career and about whether or not you're coming back to Congress is whether you're going to get a primary in the Democratic, or whether you're going to primary in the Democratic process or electoral process. If you're in a bright red area, you're not concerned about a general election. You're not concerned about a Democrat run against you. You're concerned about a Republican primary, and are you conservative enough to win that Republican primary? Same thing in the blue district. Are you liberal enough to win a primary? Are you doing the things you need to do if you're in a bright blue district to resist President Trump's policies and to push back against him? If not, you're susceptible to a primary. And this has gotten, these districts, roughly right now, you can see the gray districts that are the light blue, the gray, and the light red are the districts that are considered the middle. 10 years ago, there were roughly 80 to 100 districts that were in that kind of realm. Districts are much more partisan now and are not as competitive. Now, how does this impact the presidential side? This is the presidential election margin, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. As you'll see, the light red and the light blue are less percentage. So Donald Trump, those light red, Donald Trump won those with roughly, with a margin of less than 10%. Some of these districts, he won with big margins. But as you look at this, the one thing I'll circle back to, a lot of really red districts there. Not as many really red districts here. And what we saw in the healthcare debate, and one of the healthcare failure to repeal, was some of those Freedom Caucus members who are the most conservative on the Republican side hail from some of the reddest districts. So as you look at legislation, you look at Donald Trump and what his Twitter and how he can use the bully pulpit, it really breaks down to 435 individual members voting the way they should. If it's a light blue state, President Trump might be able to motivate them and kind of get them to where he wants them on legislation. If it's a light red, they're going to be more susceptible to the bully pulpit because they need Trump, and likely Trump won with a higher percentage than they might have in those individual districts. So this is going to be fascinating to watch, and we'll talk about this a little later as to how this impacts the agenda for President Trump and how it impacts appropriations, defense spending, and things of that sort. Building an engagement strategy. The first thing, pay attention to President Trump's key themes that are out there. Second, understand who the key influencers are. Third, be opportunistic with the agenda and the timeline, and this is particularly for defense and the sensing community, and then engage at all levels. The key themes. Everybody's heard this, America first. Donald Trump has been an America first guy, has had a nationalistic message for 30 years. He has not, that's something he used, if you go back to his late 70s, the 80s, this is the message he's consistently gone back to. America first, trade deals are bad, etc. So that's a key theme to pay attention to. Secondly, kind of his message to the American people, it belongs to you. Again, this is something that you have heard him say. This is more of that economic nationalist language that you hear quite a bit. One of the interesting things is, and as we get back at it, we'll kind of address this in the first 100 days, is it's still, policies are still being packaged this way, but there is some movement that you're beginning to see, particularly on trade with China and things of that sort. He's not done some of the things that he said he would do in the campaign. NATO is another great example where he said that he's actually just turned yesterday on NATO and said NATO is doing everything they need to do. So it's important to pay attention to these key themes because as you're looking to engage in Washington, as you're looking to engage at the local level, you need to have this in the back of your mind. And then the key influencers. One of the big issues that we have in Washington right now is you still have, there are roughly 4,500 political positions that have to be filled in Washington. Right now, we're nowhere close to that many being filled. You've got roughly 450 Senate-confirmed positions that have to be filled. We're nowhere near 450 Senate-confirmed. And what that leaves is it leaves a vacuum of political leadership at the Department of Defense, at the Department of Homeland Security, at those key agencies where you've got now career staff and you've got holdovers in the case of the Department of Defense who are making decisions. We've got Secretary Mattis, who has been confirmed, Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson, Mark Green, who's a state senator from Tennessee, has been nominated as the Army Secretary. And then we've got Pat Shanahan, who's been nominated as the Deputy Secretary of Defense. One of the things we've seen is that there was a misfire with the Department of the Navy, and there was also a misfire with the Department of the Army because there were you had billionaires whose their investments were a little too hard to untangle, as we've seen. And we're still waiting. There are a lot of other names that are beginning to come out. Bob Daigle is coming over to lead CAPE. But we're still waiting for a lot of those DASD. And at the Department of Defense, what I'm hearing at this point is that everything at the Deputy Assistant Secretary and above will be a political appointee. Right now under the Obama administration, you've had a lot of those who serve as career people who serve in those roles. So what I'm hearing now is you've got roughly, so you'll have more political appointees that still need to be filled. And they're going through, after some missteps on the confirmation process and kind of the research on each of those, you're beginning to see some movement there, which is good. Some other key cabinet officials, Rex Tillerson at State. You've got John Kelly at Homeland Security. CIA's Mike Pompeo. Energy is Rick Perry. Transportation, Elaine Chao. And then Commerce, you've got Wilbur Ross. Some of the other, I think, that's interested in the community, NASA. They still have, there are some names who are out there. It seems like Congressman Jim Bridenstine from Oklahoma, his former Air Force, is one of the leading candidates there. But we're still waiting for those announcements to come out. So this is kind of, as we look at this, we're still waiting. With energy, the senior team is over there, so it's really kind of hit and miss once you get into each of the individual agencies. At energy, you've got a chief of staff, you've got some Perry loyalists who are over, and then at transportation, you've kind of got the senior management that's in place in the Secretary's office, and similar with Homeland Security. State Department, we now have, there's a Deputy Secretary who's been nominated. The nominee was actually, had already been nominated to be the General Counsel at the Department of Defense, and he was shifted over to be the Deputy Secretary of State. And then Commerce, Still hearing I think it's still a little outstanding on the deputy over there, but they're beginning to get some of their senior team in place as well. One of the fascinating things, and one of the really kind of interesting things that this White House is doing, one of the campaign promises they made was to rethink government and rebuild government, restructure government. Jared Kushner, who's become kind of the staffer for everything, has the White House Office of American Innovation. And what they're responsible for doing is trying to determine what should the government look like, and how can you bring technology in to make the government more effective and more efficient. So this is something that I think you should pay attention to. I think you should seek ways to engage with this community, because what we're looking at here is we're looking at people who, and a lot of the folks who are not listed, there are a lot of staff who are not listed here that are technologists and others from the tech community and others who are actually trying to, who are advisors to this group as well. So they're thinking about everything from how much excess capacity and real property does the government have, and how can you shift that out to how can you deploy new business processes, et cetera, to make the government more efficient and more effective in providing services to the American people. Opportunistic on the timeline. So now we get into the meat of what's going on right now and how does it impact you. February, you had President Trump addressed a joint session of Congress. March, he sent over his FY18 skinny budget, is what they called it, which is kind of the top line. We're expecting the main details to come out in mid-May. And then in March, he also released the FY17 supplemental. There was a Department of Defense supplemental and then a border security supplemental as well. In May, we'll have details to be released about the specific FY18 budget. FY15 is technically the deadline for the congressional budget to be approved. That is not going to happen, obviously, since it's this week. So that will not happen. And then you've got April 28th, the continuing appropriations bill expires. So the government is set to run out of money on April 28th. That is the big debate right now. That is the big concern right now. Is if you think back to the maps that I showed you, can the government, the people on Capitol Hill, the lawmakers on Capitol Hill, with the constraints that they have, pass an appropriations bill? As of right now, there are roughly 100 to 150 items that still are outstanding for an omnibus bill. The Department of Defense appropriations bill was passed in the House several weeks ago. We don't expect that to change. We expect it to be similar to what is in the final appropriations bill. So now what we believe is that they're negotiating the other appropriations bills. So we're talking about labor, we're talking about commerce, all the others. We've basically got a MILCON VA that's been passed. So military construction, Veterans Affairs has been passed. So now we've got all of these other bills that have to be wrapped in. And then they'll be moved on part of the defense appropriations bill, or bolted onto the defense appropriations bill. The challenge is some of the things to think about, some of the things that might complicate it. Border security. So if President Trump and the Republicans decide they want to put funding for the border wall on the appropriations bill, the Senate Democrats had said they will not support that. So now you don't have the 60 votes you need in order to get the appropriations bill to the floor, which is going to require negotiations. If Senate Democrats, so let's say the best case scenario that the Republicans don't put the border security wall or the border wall on there, funding for the border wall, and you pass an omnibus over to the House of Representatives to fund the government beyond April 28th. Mind you, Congress is in recess this week. They're in recess next week. They come back the following Monday, and they have roughly 4 days to fund the government. So you have the next action going to the Senate. It'll pass it back to the House. So best case scenario, you have an omnibus that gets 70 votes, maybe 75 votes in the Senate. They pass it over to the House. If you think back to and this is where the congressional map becomes a player. If you think back to that congressional map, there are a lot of those really red state Republicans who've said, we won't vote for an omnibus. So if you've got a bill that passes with 70% in the Senate and you kick it over to the House, if Minority Leader Pelosi and the Democrats say this doesn't fund our priorities enough, you could see yourself kind of pushing toward a shutdown. My hope is that doesn't happen. I'm hoping that sanity will prevail, but I don't necessarily, I can't rule out that there will be another week-long CR to kind of give them a little more time to kind of put this together. So all of that is kind of playing out kind of at the top line where you've got a highly partisan era, or you've got a highly partisan environment, and you're trying to fund the government and do some of these key things. And then April 29th is the 100-day mark, and then you've got September the 30th is when fiscal year 17 ends. Top agenda items for the Republicans. So pay attention to the top agenda items. Increased defense spending. I'll show you the budget charts in a few minutes. You'll see that President Trump has lived up to his promise to increase defense. There are some on the Hill who don't believe he's done enough. He's not gone far enough, but he has moved to increase defense. U.S. border security, and the conversation has been focused on the U.S.-Mexico border, but they're also focused on the U.S.-Canada border as well, the northern border. And that's one of those where, as you look to sensing and as you look to optics, photonics, Secretary Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, has indicated that on the southern border, it's not going to be a contiguous wall, that there are other technologies that can be deployed to provide for security as well, border security. And that's where I think this community has a real opportunity as well. Other priorities: repeal the Affordable Care Act and reform health care. As we're looking at this from a 100-day perspective as well, increased defense spending, it's in the process. U.S. border security, in the process. I think they've gotten 200 bids back to start building portions of the wall on the southern border. But there are also a lot of other things that are out there. Repeal the Affordable Care Act. The repeal bill went down in a flame of glory. And one of the things I think we've learned is that was actually a learning lesson for President Trump, because what he understands now is he's got to be personally engaged in legislation, but also he can't rely on staff to do it. He's got to get personally involved, and I think that was an embarrassment to him. And I think that's where, as I said earlier, kind of at the top as a joke, everything's normal. I think the failure of the repeal bill showed President Trump what he needs to do, and that is return normality to the White House. Infrastructure and bridges, this is ongoing as well. They've started hearings in the House and the Senate. This is another opportunity, I think, where this community can particularly play a role as you bring smart grids, smart structures that relies on sensors, that relies on optics, photonics to the table, whether that's with rail and transportation, whether it's cars with autonomous vehicles, whether it's infrastructure improvements as well. Energy, once again, the kind of all the above energy solution as we're looking for that. There's been a major deregulation, or there has been some deregulation. So this is another one of those where kind of sensors play a key role. Roll back Obama administration actions and overregulation. President Trump has signed rules in. I think this is another opportunity you have to roll back 2 regulations for every one that's enacted. Comprehensive tax reform, this is the other big one. Kind of the next agenda item will be agenda items, according to President Trump, after health care. Comprehensive tax reform, but then also energy security as well. On the comprehensive tax reform, border adjustment. How many people have heard of border adjustment? So a few have heard of border adjustment. Basically, that's a tax on products that are coming into the U.S. President Trump is not a fan of the border adjustment tax. Speaker Ryan is a fan of the border adjustment tax. So we'll see how this continues to play out. And then workforce development as well. You've got a new chairman at the Education Workforce Development. She has a community college administrator background. So she's been focused very much on workforce development and how industry is working with local education authorities to really kind of improve, to make sure that education and the opportunities are there, both at the K through 12, but then the community college and the four-year college, and on through kind of the graduate level, are meeting the needs of the private sector. So now we get into the 100 days. Washington Post, 100-day outlook. They're tracking 60 promises that President Trump made. with his contract for the American voter. They assessed that 5 of those have been kept, and five of those have been broken. 11 have been launched, 2 are stuck, and 1 is compromised. And then 26 have not yet been rated at this point. So as we look at what's been accomplished, you have a Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch, who was confirmed last week. You've got, and that's another one that had kind of been in the news. He signed a bill. He signed an executive order to repeal 2 regulations for everyone. Lifetime ban on White House lobbying. That's also on the sorry, that should be not accomplished there instead of accomplished. I apologize about that. On the not accomplished side, on the right-hand side, you've also got the 5-year ban on administration and congressional officials from lobbying. So he has one on the accomplished side and one on the not accomplished side. On the accomplished side, you've got rollback energy regulations and the Keystone Pipeline, and then you've also got announced the withdrawal from TPP. On the not accomplished, you've got label China as a currency manipulator, cancel visa to countries that won't take back illegal immigrants. I guess I missed this one, but it's on the not accomplished side. Fully repeal the Affordable Care Act, and then make a 2-year and 4-year colleges more affordable. So as we continue to kind of push toward that 100-day, there's going to be a lot more of these type stories that are assessing how the Trump administration is doing. Some of the key areas for defense and national security. The current position of AT&L, Acquisition Technology Logistics, or Acquisition Technology Logistics, has been broken up under the Defense Authorization Bill from last year. It's been broken up into basically 2 pieces. One, the research and engineering side, and then it is the acquisition and sustainment side. And why did they do that? They did that so if you've got technology that DoD is interested in buying, I know y'all heard from DARPA yesterday, so this is outside of the DARPA side. So you've got the DARPA who's investing in really cool new technology. What this is responsible for on the research and engineering is to make sure that you've got some of those technologies ready before you spiral them into weapons systems. So you focus not on the acquisition side, so that one person's not on the acquisition side, and focused kind of on the back end, but they're focused on making sure you get the right technology ready to go before you spiral it into a weapons system. And then the Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment, they're going to be responsible for the processes of making those weapon systems to make sure your Joint Strike Fighter continues to be on target from a cost standpoint. So that is something Secretary Mattis is still working through how he wants to structure the Department of Defense and kind of on the staffing side. So he has indicated he's already signed a memorandum of understanding to move into this position, the guidance. So he's taking steps to break this apart. You've also got a senior official that's responsible for directed energy weapons. This is something new that came out of the Defense Authorization Bill last year as well. So the first time instead of having, you've actually got one person in the Department of Defense who's responsible for coordinating with all the military services on what they're doing on directed energy. Another opportunity is identify optics and photonics-based capabilities to use on the border security. I know border security is one that's touchy because it's really emotional, but there are opportunities for, I think, the optics and photonics community to to ensure you don't build necessarily that wall, that you can use other technologies. And then tap into conversations about cybersecurity. This is another that will continue to be big. How many people have heard about Russian hacking into the U.S. election system? So cybersecurity is going to continue to be there, not only on the electoral side, that's kind of where the focus has been, but it's also about protecting our businesses, protecting our information. One of the things, what doesn't get a lot of attention is that someone hacked into the Office of Personnel Management and took millions of documentations, background clearances. That's major. Many of you probably got a letter, that dreaded letter in the mail that said your information might have been compromised. I didn't enjoy getting that letter whenever it came to me. My wife didn't enjoy getting that letter as it came to her. So that's something you'll continue to see on the cybersecurity side. And then continue to work with Congress on the research and development as we move forward. There are a lot of exciting things, and it's one of those where when you look at autonomous vehicles, it's very interesting, but Congress is not necessarily situated right now to determine what needs to be in autonomous vehicles and kind of what those regulations look like. So it's opportunity for communities to engage with Congress and help shape what that looks like. And then also quantum technologies. That's a new one that the House Science Committee is now going to start focusing on, is quantum technology. And I think we just found that out earlier. They just added that to their agenda items earlier this week. So that's something that will continue, that it will be interesting to continue to track as well. Now, budget and appropriations, the defense budget. If you look to the far right, this is the tracker of where we were. If you look up to FY11, that's when the Budget Control Act got implemented. You saw the numbers tick down for FY13, FY14. We're slowly building back out of that initial trough that we saw as a result of the Budget Control Act. I think one of the things that we'll continue to see is you see the FY17 Obama budget, you see the FY17 Trump budget that he sent back up, kind of a renewed or a kind of updated budget, and then you've got the FY18 Obama budget that was part of the FYDP, the Future Year Defense Plan that he released as part of his FY17 budget. What you see is Trump goes above that as well. So he's increased, and this is from the GAO, kind of their expectations on what to look like. So Trump is beginning to, he had initially promised a massive kind of influx in defense money. You're seeing a slow increase. Instead of kind of that initial first year FY18, a huge investment, you're seeing it begin to tick up, and that could even, and then I think in FY19 you'll see it continue to kind of go up as well. One of the challenges that you've got with this is that this is, and we'll see it in another slide, it's above the Budget Control Act. So the Budget Control Act is still in effect. So you still have to turn off sequester at some point. So that's a big one that Congress has to focus on, as well as President Trump does as well. It's great that this budget's out there, but you still have sequester that could come in and take that meat cleaver and just chop the top of it off. So that's something we have to continue to kind of track. This is a good start. We'll probably see there's differing, some people in Capitol Hill want to put the FY17 supplemental that gets to that Trump number for 17. Some in Congress want to put the supplemental on the FY17 appropriations bill that will move in 2 weeks. If you do that without having without having a similar increase in non-defense spending, you're not going to get the support of the Democrats in the Senate and the House, and you could end up in a shutdown. So I think what they'll probably end up doing is putting the supplemental, addressing it at a later date and moving it at that point, instead of moving it as part of the 17 bill that we're going to see. And on specific line items, here's something to look at with this is the FY17 request is submitted by President Obama, and then you've got the additional Trump request, which is roughly $25 billion, 24.9, and then specifically where that money's going. Military personnel, $1 billion, so adding additional force structure to the military services. 7.2 in operations and maintenance. This is one of the big things that President Trump spoke on during his campaign, and one of the things that congressional Republicans are very focused on as well is the operations and maintenance account, because you don't have enough money at this point and maintainers to keep your equipment in good working order. So that's something you'll see. Procurement, $13.5 billion increase. Some of that's gone to Joint Strike Fighter, some of that's gone to the F-18 as well. So that's kind of one of the big money items. RDT&E, an increase of $2.1 billion that's there. So that's a great line item. I'm excited to see kind of what that looks like. So roughly a 5% increase in RDT&E. And then you've got some military construction increases as well that's in there. And then this is the OCO budget line. So I threw this in there just so you can see that there is an increase. There's an increase in the warfighting account as well, for a total of roughly $5 billion. And this gets into I'll point out the European Reassurance Initiative. it's roughly 100 million kind of going to, a 100 million increase going to that as well. So when you think about NATO, and President Trump said NATO's not effective, and then yesterday he said NATO is effective, with the 100 million of the European Reassurance Initiative, that's solely focused on Russia to make sure that we've got manpower, personnel, equipment to deter Russia and potentially counter Russia. As I said, this gets back into, here's the current BCA numbers, and this is one of the challenges that we see that are out there right now. You still have the Budget Control Act that's in place. So you've got good numbers kind of as part of the FY18 budget, but you still have the BCA limits at 549 and 516, whereas the proposed spending level is 603. So you've got, that's something that Congress has got to address, and the administration has to address that as well if we're going to realize those increases in defense spending. As you can see, the non-defense going down, the proposed change, non-defense going down rather significantly at 2.9% and then 10.3%. This is where, if we look back to that congressional delegation map, this becomes, I'll say, sporty as we look at how this plays itself out, because you've got Senate Democrats, those who are in those bright blue areas who have to worry about a primary, can't see a decrease of 2.9 and 10% in their in non-defense items. They've got to make sure, or they're going to be could expose themselves to primary challenges. Now, the fourth step to kind of a successful engagement is engage at all levels. That's something we've done, and I use this. We've got there's a Capitol Hill Day coming up as part of the National Photonics Initiative. That is coming up in 2 weeks, so it'll be that week when the government funding is in good shape. So the community will be coming to Washington, D.C. right as we're addressing government funding that week. So this will be entertaining. One of the things I always encourage clients to do is invite members of Congress, staff, and administration into their facilities in their individual states. There's no better way to create a relationship with a member of Congress than invite them in to see the really cool technology that you're building. If you're opening a factory or if you're hiring 100 new people, I would invite the president, I would invite your local member of Congress, I'd invite the senator, particularly if the senator is in cycle. If they're up for re-election and you're in Ohio and you've got 100 new jobs that you're creating, I would invite your members of Congress. I would have the local paper there and I would snap a photo and tweet it out. And the same thing with President Trump. If you're in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Arizona, Colorado, invite the president out to see this. Likely not going to come, but you get on the radar screen for the White House that you're adding jobs into the economy. And what are the reasons to engage? And this is something we point out, we've had some great success with the MPI. We've had good language in the National Defense Authorization Act. And part of what we've been able to do is bring you from the community to Capitol Hill, and then we've been able to bring policymakers and lawmakers into the community as well. And what that has allowed us to do is get some victories on behalf of the optics and photonics. So we got some good language in the NDAA. We got An American Competes in RAMI, positive language there, 21st Century Cures Act. One of the ones, and there are other subtle successes as well. Everything doesn't have to be in legislation. One of the things that every 2 years, or every new Congress, every committee comes up with an oversight plan that they have. The oversight plan says, this is what we're going to provide oversight and do. For the first time, photonics was mentioned in the Science Committee, the House Science Committee's oversight plan. So one of the areas they're going to focus on is photonics. And that comes from whenever we have members of the community who come into DC, we like to go see a staffer called Mark Marin. And Mark is great, loves the community. He's one of the only staffers where I've taken up and I've said, Mark, gravitational waves, and he knew exactly what it was, and immediately he kind of began having a conversation about it. So there are subtle things that don't result necessarily in legislation that are very effective at making sure that policymakers and lawmakers in Capitol Hill are focused on you and focused on your community. I'm looking at the time. I think I'm over. Yeah, I'm well over. So I apologize for that. I was going to try to leave it some time to to open it up for questions as well, but I'll be around. So if anybody's got questions, I'll work with Jennifer and Crescenda to make sure these are up online as well. So we'll post the presentation so you can go back and see those. But if there are any questions that you have, I'll be around afterwards as well and happy to address those. So just let me know. Perfect. Thank you.